Hi, this is Bastiaan, and today we are going to discuss concepts like contempt in chess and the f7 square. Now, the f7 square is the weakest square in chess and something that we would consider attacking. And contempt is basically a form of disrespect for your opponent. And what this really means is that if you're playing against a lower rated opponent, you won't think too much about your moves, and you may try some unsound moves, knowing that your opponent isn't strong enough to find the right defense. But with those inaccurate moves, you can get aggressive play and make your opponent much quicker. So the following game isn't necessarily 100% sound, but it is played against about a 1600 rated club player. And we can see how aggressive play will win the match quicker. So I'm playing white, and the game starts out with e4, then e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, so we're seeing the Ruy Lopez. Now knight to f6. This is called the Berlin defense. And this move, among other things, attacks the pawn on e4. And there are a few classical ways to continue. For instance, I can play the tame d3 in order to protect the pawn. I can play knight to c3, develop my fourth knight. Or probably best is I can castle. And if black takes the pawn at this point, I can play rook to e1 to attack the knight and the pawn. We notice that the king is stuck in the center on a half open file. Or I can play d4, which undermines the pawn on e5 and will create an open file, after which rook to e1 can be played. So if pawn takes pawn, rook to e1, and we can see that black's center has become under attack with little way to defend it, and black has a king stuck in the center, and this is probably the best continuation, but we're not going to see that today. I immediately play knight to g5. Now this does two things. It protects the pawn on e4, and it also creates a first attacker on the weak f7 square. Black replies with pawn to d5, adding two attackers on the pawn on e4. Now I could recapture the pawn, but then queen recaptures, and we can see an attack on the bishop and the pawn on g2, so that's probably not best. Knight to c3 is played instead, adding a second defender on the pawn on e4. Now at this point, black may grab the pawn and I can recapture, so this is why the second defender is needed. But instead black tries d4, attacking my knight on c3, which is forced into retreat. But black has made a critical mistake in that he's overextending the center, and we can see now that the f7 square is unable to be protected by pawns if I play my bishop on the c4 f7 diagonal. So there's no way a pawn can block this diagonal. I play bishop to c4, placing my attacking the f7 square with my second piece and sacrificing my knight on c3. Now if you would have developed the bishop to c4 in the opening, it couldn't have stayed there after the d5 pawn break. But now, with black overextending the center, it is possible to retreat and create a second attacking piece. So black takes my knight, which is probably best. I take the pawn on f7 with check, so I've sacrificed the piece in order to attack black's king. king to e7, and now I recapture the pawn on c3. And we can see black's king stuck on a black square on e7. I've activated my black squared bishop, and we can see a diagonal open for developing another piece with tempo. Black continues in grabbing the pawn on e4. This also develops the knight, or can redevelop the knight to d6 in order to block the diagonal with check. Bishop to a3 check, knight to d6 blocks, and queen to f3, bringing the queen into the action. h6, attacking the knight. Again, this threat will be ignored, and I will continue with an attack of my own against the enemy king. What I would like to do is play queen to f7, which is a checkmate. I cannot do it because this bishop is in the way. Now, of course, the knight is threatening or guarding that square, but it is pinned because of the bishop. So basically all I need to do now is move this bishop and continue with the mating attack and ignore the attack on my own knight. There are two ways of doing so, because there are two diagonals available in order for me to retreat the bishop. And once again we are going to see a little bit of contempt here against my opponent. Bishop to g6 is probably best because it prevents black from playing queen to e8. So if queen to e8 is played, we can see that the queen is now guarding against the mate threat with queen to f7. Of course it's not possible because the bishop is on the diagonal guarding e8. If not queen to e8, black must now try, say, king to d7, and this activates the knight on d6 because there's no longer a discovered check. Now the knight is probably guarding the f7 square against the queen, but we can continue our attack with bishop to f5 check, knight, and if knight takes, queen to d5 check, knight to d6, or bishop to d6, it doesn't matter, with the mate on e6. It's just one possible continuation. There are defenses for black, but they're probably too hard for my opponent to find. But instead of retreating on the e8 h5 diagonal, I retreat to bishop to d5, and this allows black to find a defense with queen to e8, although he still has a lost position. But if he doesn't find it, we can continue with eventually our queen to f7 mate threat. And black doesn't find it, which will lead to an even quicker mate. He plays king to d7, which is the wrong defense. It does activate the knight against a queen to f7 check, but now we can see the point of having our bishop on the c4 f7 diagonal. I can play bishop to e6 check, so this wouldn't have been possible if our bishop was on the g7 or h5 square. So check, forcing king to e8, queen to h5 check. Of course this square cannot be used because this knight has become active without a pin on the king. If king to e7, we get queen to f7 mate, but black lasts one move longer. He plays g6, an in between move, queen takes, king to e7, queen f7 checkmate, and it's a checkmate on move 15. So this is one of the things that makes me enjoy club play. It's because we can play some moves that are sometimes inaccurate, but allow for an exciting game and quick mates against weaker opponents. So I hope you enjoyed watching this game and understood a bit about the mentality of playing chess against opponents and changing your playing style against weaker or stronger opponents, and learned something about the F7 square. So thanks for watching, please leave a comment and have a great evening.